Hey, Bane.
Hey, Felfop. What's up, mate?
Yeah, have you seen the new Jess Phillips video?
Yeah, unfortunately I have. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about it?
Oh, well, she's trying to fix family court problems. Yeah, and you always hear about how feminists want to help men, and they always claim that feminism will address men's rights issues, so I figured this would be a great example of us to see what a feminist politician would do when it came to helping out men's rights issues like the extreme inequities in family court.
Well, you know, mate, that is a very good point, because after the debacle last year with Jess Phillips, where she basically laughed at men's rights issues, she did come out in an article and say that she does actually care about men and men's issues. So it will be interesting to see what she says in this video. Let's have a look.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to start on a positive note in a debate that has so far been incredibly moving, even to those who are the most battle-hardened and battle-weary as myself. It has been incredibly moving. The positive is that today, this morning, the government released information around the protection of women's refuges from some of the changes to the housing benefit bill that was going ahead. And I want to pay credit to the government for finally listening.
Yes, isn't it great that the government is finally listening and doing something about women's refuges? Now, if only they could do something about men's refuges. I mean, you know, maybe it'll only take, I don't know, another 40 years or something for the government to actually start giving a shit about men.
Do you see the look on her face? I mean, she's definitely feeling like she's accomplished something here, and to me, from what she just said, it sounded like she just basically convinced the government not to cut funding for something that somebody else had already put into place. So to say that they're finally listening seems a little bit weird, but maybe I'm reading too much into it. What do you think, Bane?
Well, I think the government has been listening to feminists about female victims of domestic abuse for around 40 years now. But at the same time, male victims have been forgotten, which is interesting when you consider the feminist worldview, where men are the dominant ones in positions of power, as Jess told us last year, making the rules to benefit men, and it's women who apparently are missing out. That's what Jess told us almost a year ago in Parliament, which is interesting if you actually look at the facts, isn't it, Jess? Next.
On the issue, but also to say that in this House on these matters we must work together, and today all of us here, the stories that we hear today have got to go some way to getting change in this area. So this is now our next fight, and I think it's a fight that the public are going to get pretty involved with, as the Archers, I believe, is about to enter into the family courts if what Rob Titchener said at the end of the episode on Friday is anything to go by, and that has done a huge amount to raise awareness of the issue, and the family courts is an area that really, really needs some of that.
Yeah, family court is a place that really could use some more awareness. That's why you've got guys dressed like Spider-Man climbing on top of MPs' roofs over there.
But Felfop, you've missed the point here that Jess is trying to make. It's all about the type of awareness, or to be more specific, who that awareness benefits. And I can pretty much tell you now, mate, it's not going to be fathers, that's for sure.
We've heard heartfelt and heartbreaking accounts across the House of what is happening to victims of domestic violence in the family courts.
Now, I have to wonder, is Jess talking about all victims, regardless of gender, or is she talking about a specific group of victims? Let's continue and find out.
Having this debate today is incredibly important for a number of reasons. The first is to send out a rally cry to all the victims in this country and their children that down here in this bubble that we can hear them.
Yeah. Well, she just said all victims, so I guess that would mean men as well, right?
The family courts in this country, for those who have never had anything to do with them, and for most of the people who have, are incredibly secretive. They are wrapped up in confidentiality, where children get called P1, P2, X4, and they get no media attention for this reason. It is very difficult to report on what goes on there. So today, here in this place, it is our chance to flood some much needed light onto that darkness.
I would agree that we need reform in family court, but by the tone that she's taking, you can probably already tell, Bain, that she's not going down the path that we would like it to go.
And see what our institutions are really doing for the people in the UK. I will.
I thank her for giving way. Does she agree with me that there's still much work to be done to ensure that the police get the cases to court? The case of my constituent, Louise, suffered the most terrible abuse, but has never had that day in court, not just a personal tragedy for her, but a national scandal for all of us.
I agree entirely with my honourable friend, and I think that actually in this place we've got some reasons to be really proud of efforts that have been made by successive governments year in, year out. The laws in this country are relatively good when it comes to domestic violence.
Relatively good when it comes to domestic violence, unless, of course, that you're a male.
Keep in mind, bud, this is the same lady that stood there and said, I think that we need to not talk about men's issues until there's an equal number of women in Parliament as there are men, because men's issues don't matter until we have equity up in here. But she's admitting right there that successive generations of the government has done good things for women.
Well, that's a very interesting dilemma that some feminists have created for themselves, isn't it, mate? I mean, they start out by saying that we don't need a men's rights movement because men are in positions of power. Therefore, these men in positions of power must look after all of men's issues, all of men's concerns, right, as opposed to dealing with women's concerns. This is the exact argument that Jess made almost a year ago in Parliament, because apparently male politicians only deal with male issues, and female politicians, it seems, will only deal with female issues, which is strange if you look at reality, because it seems to be both male and female politicians who are catering to female issues and ignoring male issues. And the interesting thing is I had this very conversation earlier this month with a TERF, a radical feminist, trans-exclusionary, man-hating monster on Twitter, who claimed that, there's no need for men's rights groups because men have all the power and influence, and therefore it seems that every single male issue is automatically catered for. Yet at the same time, she was so thankful to feminism for giving women all these advantages and rights and helping them fight, the evil patriarchy. And I have to ask, if male politicians are only interested in helping males and don't give a shit about female voters or female citizens, then how exactly has feminism had any influence whatsoever? These two concepts, as presented by these feminists in the extreme, contradict each other. They don't make sense. If those in power only cared about males, then feminism would have died out decades ago and had absolutely no influence on the world whatsoever. But we actually see the opposite. We actually see it as a protected ideology, which has allowed it to go from something which could have been a force for good into a force for nonsense. Because remember, folks, air conditioning is oppressive to women, as well as farts. And to some feminists, these issues are more important than male suicide or fathers actually having access to their children.
I'm starting to lose faith in the idea that she will help us.
Where we fail, time and time again, is in how we implement those laws, and you don't need to look very much further than many police reports on assessments of how the police are handling cases of domestic violence to see that we need to do more. I think in this place sometimes we make up laws and they open an enormous door into an empty room, and that is a problem for victims. And what I want to say to the victims who may be watching this, and lots have been in touch with me to say that tell their story, want their stories heard, and what I'm sure everybody in this place wants to say, the most important message, and a message victims of domestic and sexual violence rarely hear, is that we believe you. And that is those 3 words. If every single one of us could just tell everybody to stand and say, we believe you, we could change things for victims of domestic violence who are frequently disbelieved by every single agency that they are put in front of.
This is unbelievable, isn't it, Bain? She's a lawmaker, and she's saying we need to believe victims. My dear God. Bain, tell me you've got a whole bag of ammo for this.
Well, I look at it this way. If someone I know comes up to me and tells me that they're a victim of domestic abuse or sexual assault or something like that, I would tend to believe them, unless, of course, their story was a bit fishy, or, it contradicted itself, or the person was a known liar or something like that. Except for those circumstances, I would take them at their word. But it's a very different thing when we're talking about the legal system and police. Me believing someone that I know isn't going to have a lot of consequences if for some reason the story turns out to be false. However, the legal system has the authority to, put people in jail or to take away their kids. And that's what she's getting at here. She's talking about mothers making accusations of domestic abuse towards fathers and the kids being taken away from the fathers. Now, under those circumstances, there definitely needs to be some kind of evidence, some kind of proof, because there are pretty severe consequences at the end of the day. Now, I know that there are some people out there who will probably be saying, but Bain, what about the children? Why don't you think of the children? Isn't it better to err on the side of caution and maybe save the children from some abuse, just in case the accusations are true? Okay, let's look at that point of view, shall we? Let's go with that, but let's flip it. So now, instead of just an accusation from the mother, let's say all we need is just an accusation from the father, and based on that and nothing else, no evidence, no proof, just an accusation, he can then take the kids away from the mother. Now, do you think that all those people who a second ago were saying, but think of the children, are going to still be saying, think of the children? They're not. What they're going to be saying now is, but hold on a second, wouldn't this be open to abuse? Couldn't the children be taken away from mothers who haven't done anything wrong? This is unfair. Well, if it's unfair for mothers, then it's unfair for fathers as well. It's that fucking simple. And yeah, we do need to think of the kids, but we shouldn't open up a system which is open to abuse, which is open to falsehoods. And thinking of the kids also means the kids having access to their fathers. Fathers who haven't done anything wrong except piss off their ex-wives. Now, I'm not suggesting that all ex-wives or mothers or women do this, but there are some who abuse the system, and we shouldn't make it easier for those particular people to continue to abuse the system.
The second reason that today's debate is so important is to educate ourselves as legislators. My honourable and very dear friend, the member for Hove, and I have chatted about this subject over many times over the past 6 months. On many occasions he has sort of bounded up to me and said, and been stunned by a case that he has, as if this is the worst case in the whole world. And he, I'm sure, will give voice to some of those examples today of the very shocking stories. He is always so shocked and horrified and angry about every case. And for me, the cases have become more expected. My years of working with victims of violence have in many ways numbed me, although I'm only human.
Well, based on some of the things you said almost a year ago, Jess, I would say it is questionable whether you are, in fact, actually human or not. Now, the argument she made almost a year ago was basically we shouldn't pay attention to men's issues because the majority of Parliament in England is filled with male politicians, which apparently means that they're automatically concerned about male issues. And apparently that's all, they're concerned about. So until there is an equal number of female politicians who would then balance that out, it's unfair to have a day in which we talk about male issues, like male suicide, for example. She actually scoffed at the idea of talking about men's issues and had a bit of a chuckle about it. Now, the reason why she acted like this is she believes that male politicians can only talk about male issues. They're only concerned with male issues, apparently, and that female politicians apparently can only be concerned about female issues, which in Jess's case is 100% correct. The reality is that a politician should be able to represent their electorate regardless of the gender of the people in the electorate. So yes, a male politician can actually be concerned about female issues and do something about it. For example,
on many occasions he has sort of bounded up to me and said, and been stunned by a case that he has, as if this is the worst case in the whole world.
What a shame that Jess couldn't be equally concerned about male victims and male issues. After all, she is meant to be representing males as well as females. Her job isn't just to represent female voters, but to represent all voters in her electorate. Now, I should point out that up till this point she has been saying victims, which is genderless, but trust me, she very much is headed towards the female victim, male perpetrator model. We'll get to that in a little while.
Bain, in the last year, I've counseled a few dads and helped out a few guys as far as what they need to do to get through family court or to get their ex to let them have the visitation they were supposed to get and yada yada. And one thing that I've noticed is that those guys tend to be in messed up situations. The people reaching out for help are in, generally speaking, the most extreme situations. That's why they're reaching out for help, because the normal avenues for help aren't there.
To some of them, I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She talks about her years of working with victims of domestic violence. I too worked in that field, and one of the things that I found was frightening was that courts tend to think of domestic violence only in terms of bruises or of injury. And there is still, and the Archers have been brilliant at showing the impact of coercive and abusive behaviour.
Now, this is actually a very interesting point here, because some people find it very hard to believe that males can be victims of domestic abuse because typically males are bigger than females, and people say, well, surely the man could have defended himself. This, of course, doesn't take into account the fact that a lot of men will refuse to hit a woman, even if he's being physically abused. A lot of men are taught from a very early age that you never hit a woman no matter what. And then there's the situation that if you do defend yourself and hit the woman, then you as the victim will be seen as the victimizer and likely to end up in jail. So there are lots of reasons why a male may not defend himself and be the victim of physical domestic abuse. But We are told by feminists that domestic abuse isn't just physical, it is also psychological, and they are 100% correct on this. This changes the whole situation because the men are bigger, therefore only men can do it excuse goes out the window. So unless you believe that women are naturally somehow morally superior to every single man on the planet, they're just, women are somehow naturally more pure and don't have all the human failings that men do. Or alternatively, you believe that women are psychologically weaker and incapable of manipulation or inflicting psychological harm on a male. Unless you believe those two things, you have to accept the premise that women can also inflict psychological abuse. So when these female politicians in Parliament are talking about victims of domestic abuse, they should be talking about both males and females here. After all, that's who they represent. Their electorate is made up of both males and females. They should be talking about both. Let's see if that's the case.
But there is an incredible naivety in believing that coercive and abusive behaviour to mothers will not also happen to children, and that if legal aid were available, it would be a huge help to those women to protect themselves.
Now you see here we have somebody who's not Jess Phillips, and she doesn't seem to know that you can't just say women and women and women, that you also have to include just the words victim as Jess does, so where it's gender neutral, because what she's just done is told us exactly the intention here. Is this is a gendered program. This is something that they're doing to specifically help women and not men. And there are male victims of domestic violence, but this program still is not looking at that. How do they do this?
Well, it's quite easy how they do this. What you do is you start with a gendered narrative which is keyed to society's tendency to protect women, and then you frame it around only protecting women and you ignore male victims.
Couldn't agree more, and I will come back on to the issues of legal aid in a minute, but the government, the opposite, have certainly tried with the law to look at coercive control, and we're too early down the line in that legislation to see if something as complex. To me, it's not actually that complex. We make this excuse that it's difficult to understand. I don't find it difficult to understand, so I'm not sure why I'm constantly cutting everybody some slack. We should be able to understand the gaslighting.
So you want to criminalize certain behaviors that you will basically have no evidence for except for, I felt intimidated. You're going to take a accuser's word and call them a victim by default. You do realize that this is creating a situation where one gender can just point a finger and the other gender goes to jail. At the very least, they lose visitation rights with their kids, have to go to classes, and maybe get to see them once every other week.
And the Archers, I think, has definitely done something. And Henry in the Archers, the small boy, there's no doubt about it that that child has been coerced, controlled. So it's harrowing. I feel chills even thinking about it. Anyway, so on one occasion, going back to this lovely member from Hove here, he ran up to me and he said to me, Jess, I just don't understand why people are still walking around in the streets. How can they carry on with their lives when this is happening? Why are they not screaming out about the awful family court system? So today, in this place, we have a chance to help other colleagues here, and most importantly, the members in front of us on the government benches, see what we, all of us as a country, are sanctioning at the moment in our court system.
So what's it going to be, Bain? Do you think she completely ignores father's rights altogether, or mocks father's rights? Which one is it going to be? We certainly can't expect her to go to bat for fathers at this point. She's made that pretty much obvious.
Well, to find out the answer to that question, you're going to have to watch part 2, which should be up pretty soon.
Right, Philip. An application about International Men's Day.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Chairman. My pitch is a fairly straightforward one, in the sense that every year since I can remember, certainly since I've been a member of this House, which is 10 years now, we've had an annual debate, and in the last few years, this committee has granted one. In fact, I think I was on the committee when it did grant the debate for International Women's Day. And that's been held every single year. And so I thought that in the spirit of gender equality, it would only be right to have a debate to commemorate International Men's Day, which conveniently falls on Thursday the 19th of November, which is a date when you may or may not have some time to allocate, so it will be very fitting. Because, of course, not only do we have International Women's Day, we also have women and equality questions every month in the Chamber, which we don't have for men. So the opportunity for men to raise issues that are important to them is very limited. And just to give you a flavour, Mr. Chairman, of the type of things that may come up and which will be part of International Men's Day, I'm not entirely sure why it's so humorous, but to discuss issues such as men's shorter life expectancy, wider male health issues, many of which go unreported through embarrassment of men to sort of go along and talk about these things, the high suicide rate amongst men, the propensity for violence against men. There's many male victims of domestic violence, again, as something that goes very much unreported because of lots of embarrassment about it. The underachievement of boys in education compared to girls, the issues around father-child relationships, and often the way that fathers sometimes feel they don't get a fair crack of the whip in terms of custody of their children and things like that. These are all issues that affect an awful lot of people around the country. Whether people agree with some people's views or not, I think it's important that the House of Commons debates these issues. I think people can recognise that they are all very real issues for many people in the country, and so in the spirit of gender equality, given that we have the debate each year on International Women's Day, which I suspect will continue under this committee, I thought it would only be fair that we had an opportunity to debate these issues under the flag of International Men's Day, which is this year on Thursday the 19th of November.
Thank you very much. Questions? Jess?
You have to excuse me for laughing, that the idea that men don't have the opportunity to ask questions in this place is a frankly laughable thing. As I say, as the only woman on this committee, it seems like every day to me is.
Well, I wasn't making, with respect, I wasn't making that point. I wasn't making the point that men don't have an opportunity to ask. I was about men's issues. There's a very big difference between men raising issues and the raising of men's issues.
But one could raise men's issues in any single one of the question sessions. So your men's health, absolutely. So prostate cancer, that could be raised in men's questions, couldn't it?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I very much look forward to these arguments being deployed when we come to consider a debate on International Women's Day, because exactly the same arguments could be raised for International Women's Day, that women's health issues, that equality issues could be raised in women and equality questions in other forms. So all I ask is for an equal crack of the whip, that if those issues can be raised without having a debate on International Men's Day, then obviously the same issues can apply for when it comes to International Women's Day. But those arguments have never won the day before this committee.
I just think that it's worth pointing out the idea that this chamber, that these houses, both of them, in any way reflect gender equality, is to me a frankly laughable thing. And so in the fight for equality, I'm not sure the men on this list necessarily have that much to fight for.
Bob, please.
Yeah, I can empathise with a lot of the issues that you're concerned about. I mean, I think many people would say that people don't talk about testicular cancer or prostate cancer for fear of embarrassment. So that's quite clearly an issue that needs a lot more public debate. My concern is the balance of debate on the list of potential speakers.
All men.
The fact that they're all men doesn't matter so much. What does matter is that there doesn't seem to be a preponderance of people from across the House, they seem to be concentrated from the Conservative Party. That either means that the Conservative Party clearly take these issues seriously and the other parties don't, or more likely that you haven't been able to gain people from the other parties that would sign up.
I think, to be fair, Bob, there are 3 members of the DUP on
from the DUP. I understand that. Yeah. I'm thinking of this.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's a fair point, and of course, if I was made aware of this issue relatively recently. I raised it in the business questions with the, and so really what that reflects is the number of people I managed to see in between business questions and having to get the form in on 5 o'clock on the same day. And I would like to think that getting that many names in such a short period of time shows there's actually quite an appetite for debate. And I'm sure I would be astonished if there were not members from across the House who have constituents who are concerned about the issues that I've just raised.
Philip, please.
Yes, I mean the points that Ms Phillips has raised would contribute, no doubt, to the debate. Those who don't feel that men's issues should be given an airing can put that point of view. And part of the point of this committee is to generate lively debates where people disagree with each other, not just a parade of people coming out with the same views, all in agreement. So from that point of view, the controversial element of Mr Davies' application would, I thought, be quite attractive. But I wanted to ask Mr Davies whether he had asked the Leader of the House for time to debate this in government time, and what the response from the government was.
Yes, well indeed, and we've had a lively debate here before the committee, which bodes well for a debate in the chamber, I would contend, Mr Chairman. I did ask for a debate, and it's perfectly clear the government aren't going to give any time for such a debate, and feel that the appropriate vehicle for such a debate would be the Backbench Business Committee. Again, it seems that the government's view is that given that it's this committee that allocates the time for International Women's Day debate, then this is the appropriate body that would consider a debate on International Men's Day.
David, please.
Well, I was just going to raise that very point that you mentioned in passing in answer to the previous question from Jess about that you'd asked the Leader of the House for a debate in government time and being directed to this committee. So moving on to the venue for this debate, as far as you are aware, where have previous debates on International Women's Day been held?
Well, look, Mr Chairman, it's not for me to tell this committee where it should and shouldn't hold the debates for the time it gets allocated. That's a decision for you, and I'll respect whatever decision that you give. My pitch, though, is that I just ask for parity with what the committee does for International Women's Day. That's my pitch, that I see that the two go side by side and hand in hand, and all I ask is for an even crack of the whip for both of us. That's my pitch. But obviously, I'm not coming here to demand. All of that's up to you.
I think the point that Bob made is very, very relevant, and that is that you have an application with support as numbered 1 to 13. 3 of whom are from the DUP, and the remaining 10 are from the Conservative Party, Philip. So, therefore, we are normally looking, when we're granting time for debate, the normal criteria that we use is that there is cross-party support for the debate. So, what we would ask for, in pursuance of your application, that you try and get some members from other parties in order to sign up to the debate.
Well, I'm prepared if I don't know if this is seemly at the committee, but I'm sure you'll rule me out of order if it's not, Mr Chairman. I'm prepared to cut you a deal, which is that if you reserve the 19th of November, I'll go away and get some names from other political parties to satisfy your requirement.
It's a very interesting proposition, but it's not one we've taken up with anyone else so far.
We don't know whether it will be offered to 19th, to be fair.
I don't care about men's issues. It's that I'm hoping for parity myself.
Hear, hear.
I absolutely care about men's issues. And when I've got parity, and when women in these buildings have parity, you can have your debate.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, if I can just make the point,
and that will take an awfully long time.
I'm not requesting a debate on representation within the House of Commons. I'm asking for debates on men's issues, and the list of issues I gave earlier, I would like to think people can recognise are genuine issues and actually are very, very rarely debated in the House of Commons. Very rarely debated in the House of Commons.
Right. Well, thank you very much for it. Thank you very much indeed. We will obviously have a discussion, as you know, I'm a previous member of the committee, about taking that forward. But I would honestly say that for us to properly consider your application, it really does need to be backed up with